Have you ever found yourself walking out of a conversation with one of your grown kids and thinking, was I just talked down to in my own home? Or maybe you've had that quiet moment at the dinner table, staring at the empty chair where your son or daughter used to sit, and wondered, when exactly did the balance shift? When did I become the one seeking their approval, not the other way around? If you've ever felt that, like you've had to shrink yourself just to keep the peace or stay connected, please hear this. You're not alone. And more importantly, you're not wrong for feeling that way. Somewhere along the line, in many families, there's a quiet but powerful shift that happens as children grow up. It starts subtle. Maybe they make a big decision without telling you. Maybe they say things like, "You wouldn't understand," or "It's my life now." And because you love them so deeply, you step back. You bite your tongue. You give space. You try to be supportive. And that's beautiful, selfless even. But over time, if you're not careful, that kind of self-sacrifice can turn into something else. Something painful. You might start giving up your voice, your values, and even your dignity, not to support your child, but to stay in their good graces. Let's be honest here. No one talks about this part of parenting, especially not when we're talking about adult children. The world tells us that the job of raising kids ends when they turn 18. But any parent over 60 will tell you, that's not true at all. Your kids may be grown, but your role doesn't disappear. It just changes. And if you don't take control of that change, it can feel like you've lost more than just authority. You've lost your place. That's why we're here today. Not to criticize, not to blame, but to reclaim something sacred. Your sense of worth, your voice, your place in your own family. Because here's the truth most people won't say out loud. Your kids need you more than you need them. Yes, even now, especially now. We're going to walk through some deep truths together. Truths that might sting at first, but can help heal old wounds and reset the foundation of love and respect in your family. And we'll start with something most parents don't even realize they're doing: lowering themselves in the relationship. Now, I want you to picture something for a moment. Imagine a parent, you, maybe, sitting across the table from their grown child. The parent hesitates before speaking, afraid their opinion will be dismissed. They apologize for things they never did wrong. They walk on eggshells, just trying to keep the conversation smooth. The child, meanwhile, barely makes eye contact, checks their phone, talks about their own life without asking a single question in return. It's not always this dramatic, of course, but these moments stack up. And if they're not addressed, they become the new normal. When you start lowering yourself in a relationship with your child, shrinking your voice, abandoning your boundaries, apologizing for who you are, it doesn't just hurt you. It sends a silent message to your child. My presence isn't valuable anymore. And that couldn't be further from the truth. The relationship between parent and child should evolve, yes, but it should never reverse. You were not put on this earth to become your child's emotional servant. You don't exist to tiptoe around their opinions or to beg for their attention or to mold yourself into someone more acceptable to them. You brought them into the world. You sacrificed. You protected. You gave. And those things matter. They still matter, even if the world acts like they don't. And this brings us to a core truth, something every parent needs to hold on to like a compass. If you don't have self-respect, your children won't either. This isn't about demanding obedience. It's not about trying to control them. It's about living in a way that says, clearly and without apology, I matter too. Because kids, no matter how old they get, still take cues from their parents. They still watch how you move through the world. And if they see you constantly undermining yourself, apologizing for having boundaries, or begging for scraps of their attention, they'll start to believe that's all you deserve. And not because they're ungrateful, but because that's what you're modeling. Think about it. We teach others how to treat us by how we treat ourselves. If you respect your time, they'll start respecting it. If you speak calmly but firmly, they'll listen more closely. If you set a boundary and hold it, not with anger but with confidence, they'll begin to understand where your lines are. And that understanding, even if it's uncomfortable at first, creates a sense of emotional safety for both of you. But the moment you start trading your self-respect for access to your child's life, you lose the very thing that made you the parent in the first place. And it's so easy to fall into this trap, especially when you're longing for connection, especially when you're afraid of being left out or forgotten. But here's another hard truth. Attention is not the same as love. This is one of the most dangerous misunderstandings in modern relationships, between spouses, between friends, and yes, between parents and children. We mistake the occasional phone call, a holiday card, or a quick text as proof that everything's okay. And maybe it is. But maybe deep down, you know that something's missing. Real love isn't measured by how often they reach out. It's not about how many emojis are in their text. Real love is seen in effort, in presence, in investment. It's the child who listens, not just hears. It's the one who shows up, not just when it's convenient. It's the one who respects your opinions, your boundaries, and your needs, not just tolerates them. If you've ever found yourself sitting by the phone waiting for a call that doesn't come, or holding back from saying how you really feel because you're afraid it'll push them away, that's not love. That's emotional bargaining, and it's exhausting. You deserve more than that. You deserve real, steady, mature love, the kind that flows both ways. And yes, your kids are capable of giving it. But first, they need to see you giving it to yourself. Because the moment you start begging for emotional crumbs, whether it's their time, their praise, or just a moment of their attention, you give away your power. And that power isn't about being in control of them. It's about being in control of yourself, your peace, your dignity, your direction. You may not realize it, but your children are watching. They may be grown, but they're still watching, and they're still learning. When they see you shrink, they start to lose the sense of guidance that helped raise them. But when they see you standing tall, not with ego, but with calm strength, they remember who you are. And in many cases, they rediscover respect for you. It's never too late to shift the dynamic. And no, it's not about being cold or cutting people off. It's about holding your ground. Not yelling, not blaming, just standing in your worth. And when you do that, you don't just rebuild a relationship, you rebuild your role in it. So if you're sitting there right now, wondering if things can ever go back to how they used to be, maybe they can't. But maybe, just maybe, they can become something better. Something more honest. Something more balanced. Because the moment you stop chasing their love and start living from your own center, they will feel it. And many of them, perhaps more than you think, will begin to lean back in. Let's keep going. There's more to uncover, more healing to do, and more strength in you than you've been giving yourself credit for. Now that we've started looking at how self-respect lays the foundation for healthy relationships with your adult children, let's dig even deeper, because the emotional dynamics we're talking about don't just happen overnight. They build slowly, in small choices, in quiet moments when you give in just to avoid a reaction, or when you let your values slide because you're afraid to cause conflict. And before you know it, you're in a place where your own child's mood determines how you feel about yourself. That's a painful place to be. It's not how love is supposed to feel. And here's the real danger, not just to your peace of mind, but to the relationship itself. When parents begin begging emotionally, when you start reaching, overcompensating, or explaining yourself over and over just to be heard, you're not being seen as someone to connect with anymore. You're being seen as someone to manage. No parent wants to admit they've started begging for attention. But you know what it looks like. You feel it in your body when you send a text and watch the screen for hours, hoping for a reply. You feel it when you drop everything to help, even though they wouldn't do the same. You feel it when you find yourself saying yes to things you don't agree with, just to avoid being left out. And that quiet voice inside you, the one that says, "This doesn't feel right," that voice is trying to protect you. You didn't raise your children just to grow into someone who's afraid of losing them. But that fear, that desperate need to stay close, can twist even the most loving parent into someone they don't recognize anymore. And when that happens, power in the relationship collapses. And not the kind of power that controls. It's the kind that earns respect. The kind that makes people pause and think before they speak to you. The kind that sets the emotional tone of a family. Because here's the thing, once you begin operating from fear of being left behind, misunderstood, or unloved, you start handing your emotional steering wheel over to someone else. Your grown child, no matter how kind or successful or loving they may be, now becomes the one who decides whether or not you're okay. And that's too much power to give away. They may not even want that kind of control. But if you keep surrendering your peace for their approval, they'll come to expect it. And over time, they may start respecting you less. Not because they're cruel, but because people naturally lose respect for those who constantly overextend themselves without boundaries. But here's what you can do, starting now. Regain your emotional balance. Not by becoming hard or distant, but by learning to stay centered, even when things feel uncertain. Emotional control is one of the most powerful things you can develop, especially in your later years. And it's not about bottling up your feelings. It's not about pretending things don't hurt. It's about learning to respond, not react. Think of it this way. Your grown child might call you and say something upsetting. Maybe they criticize a decision you made years ago. Maybe they bring up the past in a way that feels unfair. Your instinct might be to defend yourself, to justify, to prove them wrong. But what if, instead, you took a breath, let them finish, and responded with calm clarity? What if you said, "I hear that this still hurts you. I can't change the past, but I can tell you I did the best I knew how to do. I still love you, and I hope we can move forward together." That kind of emotional steadiness creates a different kind of energy in the conversation. You're not shrinking. You're not exploding. You're holding your ground with grace. And believe it or not, your child, no matter how old, feels that. They respect it, even if they don't show it right away. Now, it's important to recognize that emotional control isn't about never feeling upset. You're human. You've lived through decades of love and loss, of joy and heartbreak. You've earned the right to have deep, real emotions. What we're talking about here is learning to manage them so they don't manage you. Because when you can stay calm, you shift the energy in the room. You stop living on the edge of someone else's reactions. You create space for understanding, not escalation. And that's the kind of presence your children can look up to, not just tolerate. There's one more layer here that's just as important. And it might surprise you. Do you know why so many adult children push back against their parents, even when the parents are trying to help? Do you know why they sometimes test your patience, question your advice, or even roll their eyes when you speak? It's not always disrespect. Sometimes, believe it or not, they're testing you to find a leader. Now that might sound strange. Why would a 35 or 40-year-old test their 65-year-old mother or father to find a leader? Aren't they supposed to be grown? Yes, they are. But emotional maturity doesn't always come with age. And even adults long for stability, especially in times of stress, crisis, or major life changes. When things get hard, they instinctively look toward the people in their lives who feel solid, not reactive, not frantic, not fearful, solid. And sometimes, the way they test that is by challenging you. They might disagree more sharply than usual. They might bring up old arguments. They might even accuse you of being out of touch. And in those moments, what they're really looking for, whether they know it or not, is this. Can I still trust you to hold your ground? They want to know if you can stay standing when the emotional wind picks up. They want to know if you'll collapse, or if you'll remain rooted in who you are. And this is your chance. Not to win an argument, not to prove your wisdom, but to simply be what you've always been at your best, a calm, steady presence. When you meet their challenge with strength, not stubbornness but strength, you reset the dynamic. You remind them that you're not here to be tested like a peer. You're their parent, Still. Always. But when you collapse under their push, when you lash out or withdraw or try to buy their approval with silence or favors, the leadership role fades, and the relationship starts to wobble. You don't need to be perfect. You don't need to have all the answers. But you do need to remember that your children are still watching you. They may be married. They may be parents themselves. But they are still looking at you with the question, can I trust you to be steady, even when I'm not? And your answer, every time, can be this: yes, because I've done the work. I know who I am, and I love you enough not to let fear or emotion pull me out of my own center. That's the kind of leadership that doesn't need to be loud. It doesn't need to come with speeches or rules. It's felt. It's steady. And it's remembered. There's a reason your kids still call you when life gets messy, even if they haven't always shown you gratitude. There's a reason they still need your voice, even if they act like they don't. Because deep down, every child, no matter how old, wants to know that their parent is still rooted, still present, still dependable. You are still that person. And the stronger you become in yourself, not controlling, not desperate, just grounded, the more they'll feel it. And the more they'll come to trust you all over again. Let's keep going. There's something important I want you to sit with for a moment. Many parents believe that if their adult children challenge them, criticize them, or pull away emotionally, it means they've failed. But very often, the opposite is true. Those moments of tension are not signs of rejection. They are signals. Signals that your children are still orienting themselves around you, still measuring your steadiness, still trying to understand where you stand. Even grown children need a reference point. And whether they admit it or not, they often look to their parents to see who is grounded when emotions run high. That's why emotional control is not just a personal skill. It's the foundation of respect and leadership in the parent-child relationship. Think back to when your children were young. When they were scared, overwhelmed, or unsure, they watched you. Not your words, but your reactions. If you stayed calm, they felt safer. If you panicked, they panicked. That dynamic never fully disappears. It simply becomes quieter, more subtle. When your adult child raises their voice, withdraws, or pushes your buttons, they are often asking a question without realizing it. The question is not, can I win this argument? The question is my parent still steady enough to lean on? And the answer doesn't come from correcting them, defending yourself, or explaining every decision you ever made. It comes from your presence, from your ability to stay composed, from your willingness to listen without collapsing or exploding. This is where many parents struggle, especially as they get older. There's more vulnerability now, more loneliness, more fear of being excluded or forgotten. And when those fears take over, emotional reactions become sharper. Words come out heavier than intended. Silence becomes resentment. Kindness turns into overgiving. But leadership doesn't come from emotional force. It comes from emotional mastery. A parent who can say, I hear you, without losing themselves. A parent who can disagree without anger. A parent who can walk away from disrespect without bitterness. That parent carries authority without needing to demand it. And here's the quiet truth. When you stay emotionally grounded, your children don't feel like they have to manage you. They don't feel responsible for your happiness. They don't feel trapped by your needs. Instead, they feel relieved. Because no child, at any age, wants to feel like their parents' emotional well-being depends on them. That's a heavy burden. And when parents unintentionally place that burden on their children, the children often respond by pulling away. Not out of cruelty, but out of self-protection. This is why begging emotionally never works. When parents plead for more calls, more visits, more affection, it may come from love, but it lands as pressure. And pressure suffocates connection. Love that flows freely does not need to be chased. Now, let's talk about something that may be difficult to hear, but deeply freeing once it sinks in. Your children challenge you not because they want to dominate you, but because they are searching for leadership. Leadership doesn't mean control. It doesn't mean telling them how to live their lives. It means showing them what steadiness looks like when life gets complicated. When your child says something sharp and you remain calm, you teach them how to regulate themselves. When they push your boundaries and you hold them respectfully, you show them that love doesn't require self-erasure. When they test your limits and you don't fold, you remind them that strength and care can exist together. That is leadership. And when they feel it consistently, the testing slows down. The friction softens. Trust begins to rebuild, not because you forced it, but because you embodied it. There is one final shift that ties all of this together. It's the shift from believing your children are the center of your emotional world to understanding that you are the foundation of your own life. For many parents, especially those who devoted decades to raising their kids, this can feel uncomfortable at first. You may have organized your entire identity around being needed, around being available, around putting yourself last. But here's the truth that changes everything. When you rebuild your own center, your routines, your interests, your friendships, your sense of purpose, you don't lose your children. You become healthier for them. A parent with a full life is magnetic. A parent who doesn't cling is easier to love. A parent who doesn't chase is easier to approach. You are not here to orbit your children. You are here to live fully, with dignity and meaning. And when you do that, your children don't feel pressured to carry you. They feel free to meet you. That's when conversations become more honest. That's when visits feel lighter. That's when respect returns, not because it was demanded, but because it was restored naturally. If you've spent years feeling like you've lost your place in your child's life, I want you to hear this clearly. You haven't lost your value. You've just been standing off center. And the moment you step back into yourself, everything shifts. This doesn't require confrontation. It doesn't require speeches. It begins quietly, with you choosing to respect your own time, with you saying no when something doesn't feel right, with you responding instead of reacting, with you letting silence exist without rushing to fill it. These small changes create a powerful ripple. And over time, your children will feel it. They may not comment on it right away. They may not even understand it consciously. But they will sense that something is different, stronger, calmer, more grounded. And that's when many adult children begin to lean back in, not because you needed them to, but because you no longer do. If any part of this spoke to you, I invite you to share your thoughts or experiences in the comments. Many parents carry this weight silently for years, and sometimes just knowing you're not alone can be healing. If you found this helpful, please like the video and subscribe to the channel Strong Elderly Life. We share thoughtful conversations like this to support you in living with clarity, strength, and peace at every stage of life. Remember, it's never too late to reclaim your center. It's never too late to lead with calm strength. And it's never too late to build relationships that are rooted in respect, not fear. Here's to living your life with purpose, dignity, and quiet confidence at any age.